My name is Maribel Voss. I am 34 years old, and last November my mother stood beneath the warm lights of the Briar Glen Civic Hall and told nearly 200 people that every meaningful thing I had become was the result of her sacrifice, her discipline, and the moral foundation she had built inside me. The same woman had once dismissed my dream of becoming an architect as a rich girl fantasy. The same woman had hidden the letters that could have changed my life before I ever boarded a bus out of town. Welcome back to Pure Drama Stories, where family secrets, quiet revenge, and painful truths finally come into the light. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. Now let me take you back to Briar Glen, Colorado, to the back office of a failing roadside motel behind a flickering neon sign when I was 15 years old and still believed that the people who raised me wanted me to rise. The motel was called the Silver Pine Lodge, though there were no pine trees near it, only dry highway grass, cracked asphalt, and 12 aging rooms beside a 2-lane road. My parents bought it when I was 7. My mother, Lenora Voss, called it our family future, as if peeling doors and thin walls were an inheritance worthy of reverence. My father, Calvin, called it a steady roof, which was his way of making small things sound noble. My older brother Brennan called it free Wi-Fi and a place to crash, because Brennan had the gift of taking from every room he entered while believing the room owed him gratitude. I did not yet have the language to call the motel a cage, but I understood its purpose. It was my mother's kingdom, and every person inside it existed according to the role she assigned. I learned to draw houses in the back office, surrounded by invoices, cleaning supplies, old tax folders, and boxes of miniature soap bars. I used graph paper from the front desk and pencils taken from the registration cup. While my mother performed hospitality in the lobby, smiling at tired travelers with a sweetness she rarely wasted at home, I designed rooms filled with light, quiet bedrooms, warm kitchens, and front doors that opened toward possibility instead of obligation. I thought I was drawing buildings. Years later, I understood I had been drawing exits. Every window I sketched was an argument against the life my mother had already planned for me. When I was 15, my drafting teacher, Mrs. Evelyn Hartwell, found one of my notebooks after class. She was 62 then, tall and composed, with silver hair pinned neatly at the back of her head, and a gaze so calm it made lies feel unnecessary. She turned the pages slowly, studying each line with the seriousness of someone reviewing blueprints, not teenage daydreams. Instead of giving me the polite dismissal adults often offer ambitious children, she tapped one drawing and said, "Mara, this is not a hobby. This is a future." It was the first time an adult had placed the word future in my hands without tying it back to duty, family, or the motel. That evening, I carried the sentence home like a flame cupped against the wind. My mother was in the office counting cash from the register, glasses low on her nose, her mouth drawn tight from a day of smiling for people who paid by the night. I placed the notebook beside the money and told her I wanted to study architecture. She flipped through the pages quickly, not with curiosity but irritation, as if my drawings had interrupted something more practical. Then she said, "Houses? You think people pay girls like us to draw houses?" I told her Mrs. Hartwell thought I had ability, and my mother's expression hardened into the patient coldness she used whenever she believed she was saving me from myself. "Girls like us don't run away to draw houses, Maribel. We keep what we have alive." My father was outside repairing the loose railing near room 6. He heard enough to understand the shape of the conversation and kept working. Brennan sat in the lobby eating chips and watching football, and when he heard the word architecture, he laughed without turning around. He called me Architect Mara in the tone people use for children wearing costumes, then asked whether I could design him a mansion with a garage big enough for 6 trucks. My mother smiled at him with effortless warmth. That was the family arrangement in its simplest form. Brennan's carelessness was treated as charm, my ambition as betrayal, and my father's silence as peace. My mother was not crude in her cruelty, which made it difficult to name. She ruled through obligation, routine, and the quiet conversion of fear into common sense. She controlled the mail, the checkbook, the motel schedule, the spare keys, the family calendar, and the story everyone was allowed to tell about us. Brennan was always trying. My father was always tired. I was always forgetting what family had done for me. In our house, language was not a way to tell the truth. It was how my mother arranged reality so that no one could leave without feeling ungrateful. During my senior year, Mrs. Hartwell helped me apply to design schools from the public library because the motel computer sat behind the front desk and my mother could see the screen from almost anywhere in the lobby. We applied for scholarships, rural student grants, architecture fellowships, housing design programs, and every opportunity that mentioned first-generation students or community planning. I was accepted to Western Plains Institute of Design in Denver with a partial scholarship. It did not make the road easy, but it made the road visible. I printed the email at school and brought it home inside my history textbook like contraband. That night, I placed the paper on the dinner table between chili and cornbread. My father stopped moving his spoon. Brennan leaned back, already amused. My mother read the letter twice, and her face became dangerously still. She said, "You are not going," with the flat finality of a judge delivering a sentence. I said I had already accepted. She said I had responsibilities. I said I could work while studying. She said I worked here. I said it was my chance, and she folded the paper carefully, set it beside her bowl, and told me everything I had came from this family, and now I wanted to abandon them with a motel, bills, and a brother who could not do it all alone. Brennan had never done anything alone except excuse himself, but nobody corrected her. My father stared into his chili as though courage might be written there. The morning I left, my mother stayed behind her bedroom door. She did not cry, plead, rage, or bless me. She simply refused to witness my departure, as if a thing unseen could be made less real. My father drove me to the bus station in Grand Junction in a silence so complete it felt rehearsed. At the station, he reached under the seat and handed me an envelope containing $300. He told me not to tell my mother because she thought he had spent it on wiring supplies. I asked why he could give me money in secret but not defend me in public. He tightened his hands on the steering wheel and said my mother did not handle leaving well. I told him that was not an answer. He said he knew. That was the closest he came to courage that day, admitting the shape of his cowardice without changing it. Denver was cold, expensive, and indifferent. I worked at a print shop, then a coffee cart, then as a night receptionist in a student housing building. I built models from cardboard scraps because proper materials cost money. I ate cheap food, slept in fragments, and learned to endure rooms where classmates spoke about portfolio consultants and family-arranged internships as if those things belonged to ordinary life. But I became good, not through effortless brilliance, but through stubborn, disciplined labor. I understood bad buildings from the inside. I knew how thin walls carried shame, how cold slipped beneath cheap doors, and how temporary shelter could make people feel temporary too. My designs were not only aesthetic, they were arguments for dignity. Mrs. Hartwell wrote every month in careful blue ink, She sent articles on affordable housing, women architects, zoning reform, and emergency shelters. Sometimes she tucked $20 between the pages with a note that said, "For pencils, not pride." My mother called every few weeks, but the conversations rarely lasted longer than 3 minutes. She asked when I was coming home, whether I understood the motel bookings were down, whether I remembered my father's back pain, and whether Brennan was still trying to find his footing. She never asked what I was designing. She never asked whether I was frightened. Eventually, I stopped offering pieces of myself to people who treated my life as an inconvenience, unless it could be made useful. When I graduated, I mailed invitations to my parents, Brennan, and Mrs. Hartwell. Only Mrs. Hartwell came. She arrived in a navy dress and orthopedic shoes, carrying a grocery store bouquet as if it were a sacred object. My father texted that morning that my mother said it was too far, then added, "Proud of you." I stared at those words because they were both something and not enough. After the ceremony, Mrs. Hartwell hugged me hard enough to knock my cap sideways and whispered, "You built your own door. Now walk through it." So I did, and I kept walking for 11 years. I built my career through underpaid projects, difficult clients, delayed invoices, and conference rooms where men repeated my ideas with louder voices and received better attention. I worked on emergency housing after fires, floods, and winter storms because I understood the moral urgency of safe shelter. Eventually, I rented a small warehouse outside Denver and developed my own modular housing system. Foldable frames, solar-ready roofs, strong insulation, real windows, and units that could be deployed quickly after disasters, but later converted into permanent homes. I called it Hearthline because I wanted even emergency shelter to feel like the beginning of belonging, not merely proof of loss. At first, almost nobody noticed. Then a wildfire damaged part of a mountain town, and a county emergency manager ordered 6 prototypes when standard temporary units were delayed. Those 6 units survived high wind, heavy snow, and 2 inspectors who seemed personally insulted by innovation. A housing magazine wrote about them. A nonprofit called, then a state agency, then Northline Habitat Systems. 3 days before the Briar Glen Founders Banquet, Dr. Malcolm Rains, Northline's chief strategy officer, offered me a partnership contract worth nearly $5 million over 5 years, along with leadership of their disaster housing division. I signed on a Wednesday afternoon, and by Thursday morning the headline was everywhere. Colorado designer lands national deal for emergency housing system. Briar Glen knew before I finished reading the article myself. Small towns do not require formal announcements. They have diner counters, church friends, group chats, and women like Della Monroe, who owned the flower shop and treated gossip with the seriousness of public infrastructure. My mother called that evening, her voice warm in a way that made me immediately suspicious. She said she and my father had seen the article and were just so proud, then added that she had always known I had something special. I told her she had never said that before. After a pause just long enough for the old truth to show through, she replied that mothers often saw things children did not understand. She said I should come home that weekend because the founders' banquet was Saturday night and the town wanted to celebrate me. She mentioned a family meeting first, just to discuss things together. Because Brennan had ideas, the motel needed attention, my father was aging, and it was time to think about what family could build. In my mother's language, together meant pressure, celebrate meant control, and family meant my money wearing a moral costume. I told her I would come, but that I was bringing Mrs. Hartwell. The silence on the other end lengthened. Then my mother asked, "Your old teacher?" I said, She is family to me." Her sweetness returned, thinner now, stretched over irritation. "Well," she said, "the more the merrier." The next morning, Brennan called and opened with "Little Sister, $1,000,000 Woman," which told me he had already begun spending money I had not offered. He said he had an opportunity near the highway, an old gas station with great bones, that could become a retail strip if someone put serious capital behind it. Then he added, too casually, that he had mentioned to the bank that I might be interested in investing back home. I asked what exactly he had told them, and he laughed as though caution were a personality flaw. He said nothing was official, only that his sister believed in family and wanted to bring money back to Briar Glen. I told him he was using my name. He said he was opening a door. I said, "No, Brennan, you are opening debt and placing my reputation in front of it." His laugh vanished, and he accused me of getting fancy in Denver. I told him I had gotten careful. I drove to Briar Glen that Friday, checked into a highway hotel instead of the Silver Pine Lodge, and met Mrs. Hartwell the next morning at a diner outside town. She was 70 now, slower in her movements but undiminished in perception. Before I had fully explained the call, she said, "Your mother has built a stage." I said yes. She asked if my mother had written the script. I said almost certainly. Mrs. Hartwell stirred her coffee and asked what I intended to do. I told her I would read the room first, then decide whether the truth needed a microphone. She smiled slightly and said that sounded like the girl who used to draw windows in every room. The Silver Pine Lodge looked smaller than memory and more defeated than age alone could explain. The sign still blinked, but half the letters were weak. My mother came around the desk and hugged me for the first time in 9 years. Her arms landed correctly. Her perfume was the same powdery floral scent from childhood Sundays, but the gesture had no softness in it. It felt choreographed. "My successful girl," she said, and I understood that she had already chosen the title of her performance. My father sat behind the counter pretending to sort receipts, older and thinner than I remembered. Brennan entered from the parking lot with confidence he had never earned. His wife Talia followed quietly and congratulated me in a voice that contained no performance. My mother began touring me through the motel as though I had not grown up folding its towels and plunging its toilets. She pointed out the roof, the plumbing, the parking lot, the booking software, the sign, and the linen service with a sigh placed carefully before each problem. She never said money. The entire tour said it for her. Near the end, I noticed the back office door was locked. It had never been locked when I was young. When I asked what was inside, my mother answered too quickly that it was only old records, nothing important. Nothing important is where controlling people hide what matters. A few minutes later, Della Monroe arrived with banquet centerpieces and greeted me with delighted innocence. She said the whole town was excited about my investment announcement that night, especially the restoration of the Silver Pine and the jobs my mother had implied I would bring back. My mother's hand froze on the receipt book. I thanked Della, walked outside, and called Mrs. Hartwell. She said my mother had placed the story into the public mind before asking me privately so that refusal would look selfish. I looked through the window and saw my mother watching me. Then I told Mrs. Hartwell I needed to see the back office. At 4:30, my mother left to decorate the civic hall. Brennan took a call in the parking lot, and my father went to check a breaker behind room 9. Talia sat in the lobby scrolling her phone, but when I moved behind the desk, she glanced up, saw where I was going, and looked down again without warning anyone. The key was still taped beneath the second drawer because my mother's habits depended on the assumption that no one she controlled would return with courage. The lock resisted, then turned. Inside, the back office smelled of dust, paper and old authority. In the second cabinet, behind old insurance folders, I found a cardboard file labeled Maribel, School/Art/MISC. Inside were report cards, contest certificates, a photograph of me holding a model house in 10th grade, and 3 opened envelopes addressed to me. The first was from the Larkspur Young Designers Fellowship, congratulating me on full tuition support, housing assistance, materials funding, and a summer placement with the Colorado Community Architecture Initiative. The second letter said they had not received my acceptance. The third warned that the offer would expire if I did not respond by June 1st. On the top corner of the first letter, in my mother's handwriting, was a yellow sticky note. Do not forward. She is needed here. I sat in the old office chair, listening to the highway beyond the walls. For years, I had believed I barely made it out because that was all life had offered me: partial scholarship, debt, exhaustion, cheap supplies, and 3 jobs stitched around school. I had treated struggle as the price of leaving, but the truth was more precise and more brutal. A door had opened. My mother had closed it, filed it away, and then spent years describing my survival as evidence of her sacrifice. I folded the letters carefully and placed them in my bag. My hands did not shake. New anger trembles. Old anger becomes exact. When I stepped into the hallway, my father was standing near the ice machine. He saw the open office door, then the folder in my hand, and his shoulders dropped before I asked if he had known. He did not answer quickly enough. That was the answer. Eventually, he admitted he had learned about the letters later, after my mother had already buried them. She had told him sending me away with a full ride would mean losing me forever. I said, "So you let her hide them?" He looked at the floor and said he had given me $300. I told him he had, and that he had also let me walk into the fire uninformed. He flinched as if I had raised my hand, but I had only raised the truth. That evening, the Briar Glen Civic Hall glowed with string lights, civic pride, and the dangerous warmth of people gathered for a story they thought they already understood. Round tables filled the room. Business owners, teachers, town council members, church families, old neighbors, and former classmates sat beneath banners that read Founders Banquet, celebrating local legacy. Mrs. Hartwell met me near the entrance in a deep green jacket, holding her cane like a judge holds a gavel. She looked at my face and asked if I had found something. I told her yes. She asked if it was bad. I said, "It is clear." She nodded and said, "Clear is better than easy." My mother stood near the stage in a burgundy dress, greeting guests like a candidate. Brennan moved from table to table, shaking hands and telling people my return would be good for the town. Talia stood near the dessert table with her arms folded, watching him with the expression of someone silently revising her marriage. On every table lay a printed program. Item 6 was Tribute to Hometown Success, introduced by Lenora Voss. Item 7 was Maribel Voss Community Investment Announcement. I had agreed to neither the title nor the announcement. My mother came close enough for me to smell her perfume and whispered that people were expecting gratitude tonight. I looked at her hand resting on my sleeve and asked, "Are they?" Her smile flickered. Dinner moved slowly through chicken, potatoes, rolls, chocolate cake, and polite questions about motel renovation plans I had never made. One town councilman said he was thrilled to see young money return to old roots. I smiled because correcting him before the microphone would have been inefficient. Mrs. Hartwell sat beside me, calm as stone. Once she touched my wrist with 2 fingers and told me to breathe. I told her I was breathing. She said, "No, you're calculating." I said, "That too." And for the first time that night, she almost laughed. At 8:10, Mayor Judith Klein stepped to the microphone, thanked the sponsors, praised the local businesses, and introduced my mother as a proud parent whose daughter had put Briar Glen on the national map. The applause was warm because people love a mother's story, especially when the mother tells it first. My mother walked to the stage with rehearsed modesty, adjusted the microphone, placed one hand over her heart, and began. She said God had given her a daughter with a pencil in her hand and a dream in her eyes. She said she had raised me inside the walls of a family business and taught me hard work, service, and the belief that buildings mattered because people mattered. Then she said that when I wanted to study design, she had told me, "Go, baby, build something beautiful." Mrs. Hartwell's hand tightened around her cane, and I looked down at the tablecloth, remembering the exact opposite. Then my mother's voice trembled with polished emotion, and she said, "Tonight, as Mara returns to invest in the town that shaped her, I want my daughter to know this. Everything you are came from family." The room applauded. Some people stood. My mother turned toward me with open arms and said, "Come up here, honey. Tell everyone the good news." Nearly 200 faces turned. The old me would have felt trapped. The woman I had become understood that a stage is dangerous only when you let someone else own the microphone. I stood, picked up my bag, and walked to the stage. My mother stepped aside with the glow of someone handing over a role she believed she had written. I thanked Mayor Klein and the room, then kept my voice calm because loudness would have helped my mother. Loudness would let her call me emotional. Calmness made the facts unavoidable. I said I did have an announcement, but before making it, I needed to correct something. Chairs shifted. My mother's smile held, but her eyes sharpened. I told the room that my mother had not encouraged me to study design. When I was 17, and I said I wanted to leave Briar Glen for architecture school, her exact words were, "You are not going." I told them she had said girls like us did not run away to draw houses, and that I was needed at the motel. My mother gave a small, brittle laugh and said this was not the time. Without looking away from the room, I said it was exactly the time, because this time had been placed on the program without my permission. A murmur moved through the hall, and Mayor Klein looked down at the printed schedule as if it had betrayed her personally. I removed the letters from my bag and held them where people could see them. I explained that during my senior year, I had been selected for the Larkspur Young Designers Fellowship, which included full tuition support, housing assistance, materials funding, and a placement with a state architecture initiative. Those letters had been mailed to my home, opened, and hidden in the back office of the Silver Pine Lodge. Then I read the sticky note in my mother's handwriting, "Do not forward. She is needed here." Silence settled over the hall so completely that even the air conditioning sounded intrusive. My mother stood and said she had been protecting me, but her voice had lost its stage strength. I turned to her and said, "No, you were protecting your control." Then I faced the room again because I had not come to debate her. I had come to remove her from the position of narrator. I told them that because I never received those letters, I left with a partial scholarship, $300 from my father, and years of debt I never needed to carry. I worked nights, skipped meals, built models from scraps, and believed struggle was simply the cost of chasing a dream. Tonight, I said, I had learned the cost had been higher because people who claimed to love me had decided I had no right to choose my own future. Brennan stood halfway and said I had made it anyway, as if survival canceled the theft. I looked at him and said that was what people said when they benefited from what someone else survived. Then I told the room my brother had been telling people I intended to invest in his property deal and the motel renovation, and that this was false. I had never authorized him to use my name at the bank, with town officials, or with anyone in that room. Brennan snapped that it was private business. I told him he made it public when he attached my name to it. Talia closed her eyes, and I knew she was hearing more than my words. She was hearing the sound of a pattern becoming undeniable. My mother's performance cracked. She asked how I could come there and humiliate my own family after everything they had done for me. I looked at her and saw fear, not because she had hurt me, but because people knew. I told her I had come because she invited me, and for 1 second I had hoped she wanted to celebrate me. But she had not invited me home. She had invited my success, my contract, and my money, then expected my silence to arrive with them. The room went still in the way rooms do when the truth has become too clear to politely ignore. Then my father stood, slowly, heavily, as though years of silence had finally become physical weight. He said I was telling the truth. My mother said his name like a warning, but he kept looking at me. He admitted that he had learned about the letters later and should have told me. He said he should have defended my right to leave. He said he had given me $300 and called himself a good father, but he had let Lenora take more than money from me. I looked at him without smiling. I did not forgive him publicly so the room could feel clean. I nodded once. It meant I heard him. It did not mean the debt was paid. My mother sat down hard, as though the invisible machinery that had kept her upright for years had finally stopped. I turned back to the microphone and announced that I would not invest in the Silver Pine Lodge, would not fund Brennan's property deal, and would not pay private debts created by people who used my name without consent. Then I said I was still investing in Briar Glen. I announced the Evelyn Hartwell Young Designers Fund, beginning with $50,000 and administered through the County Education Foundation, with no connection to my family, the motel, or any private business. The fund would support rural students pursuing architecture, drafting, housing design, engineering, or community planning, especially students whose dreams were being dismissed by the people closest to them. Mrs. Hartwell went very still. I looked at her and said that when I was 15, she had looked at my drawings and told me they were not a hobby but a future. She had been the first person to make my dreams sound real. My family had given me obstacles. She had given me a door. The fund carried her name because she had earned that honor. For a moment, nobody clapped. Truth had rearranged the room, and people needed a second to find their hands. Then Della Monroe stood. Mayor Klein followed. Teachers, business owners, old neighbors, and back tables rose one by one. The applause was not sentimental like the applause my mother had received. It was slower, heavier, honest. Mrs. Hartwell pressed one hand over her mouth, and her shoulders shook once. Only once. My mother did not clap. Brennan did not clap. My father did, quietly at first, then harder. When the applause faded, my mother stood and said I thought I was better than them because I had money. I told her no. I thought I was free from her because I had stopped confusing guilt with love. She said she had fed me, clothed me, and kept a roof over my head. I told her she had also hidden the road out. She said she had done what she had to do for the family. I said she had done what she had to do to keep me useful. Those words landed without drama, plain and final. For the first time in my life, my mother had no next line ready. Before stepping down, I turned to the room and said that if any parent there had a child with a dream they did not understand, they should ask questions, not bury letters. They should not call fear wisdom. and they should not stand at the finish line claiming they carried someone whose path they tried to block. Then I left the stage. Mrs. Hartwell joined me near the aisle, not hugging me because she understood I was holding myself together with professional wire. We walked toward the exit side by side, while nearly 200 people watched the official version of my family collapse under the weight of facts. At the door, my father called my name. I stopped, but did not fully turn around. He said he was sorry, and the words sounded late, small, and real. I told him I knew, then walked out, because forgiveness is not a party favor you hand out so everyone else can leave feeling clean. Outside, the November air was cold enough to make my lungs ache. The Civic Hall windows glowed behind us, and inside I could see people standing, talking, looking toward the stage, toward my mother, toward the story that had just cracked open in public. Mrs. Hartwell stood beside me beneath the parking lot light and asked how I felt. I looked toward the motel sign blinking 2 blocks away and said it felt like I had put down something heavy. She nodded and told me not to pick it back up. I left Briar Glen before sunrise. On the way out, I passed the Silver Pine Lodge. The neon sign was still blinking, each word appearing and disappearing like a tired heartbeat. My mother's car sat outside the office. My father's truck was parked near room 1. Brennan's SUV was crooked across 2 spaces, as if even his parking required someone else to correct it. For a moment, I saw the motel as I had seen it as a child. Enormous, permanent, inescapable. Then the morning light shifted, and it became what it truly was. 12 aging rooms beside a highway, smaller than the fear it had created. I did not stop. In the months that followed, Brennan's property deal collapsed after the bank withdrew interest over questions about his claim that I was backing the project. Talia separated from him in February and sent me a careful message saying the failed deal had not destroyed the marriage. It had simply revealed how many lies were already holding it together. My mother lost her place in town without any formal punishment. Nobody voted her out of committees. They simply stopped giving her microphones. The spring fundraiser was led by Della Monroe. The summer parade was handled through Mayor Klein's office. My mother still attended events, still wore good dresses, still smiled when people looked at her, but she stood closer to the wall now. That was her real consequence. She became a member of the audience. My father began calling every other Sunday. At first, he spoke about weather, repairs, and his back. Slowly, he began asking real questions. What I was designing, whether I liked Northline, whether I still drew by hand. He never asked for money. He never put my mother on the phone. Months later, he apologized again without making me comfort him afterward, and that mattered. He was not suddenly brave. People do not become whole because they say one honest thing in public. But he was trying to stand in small places where he had once disappeared, and I allowed that effort to exist without pretending it erased the past. The Evelyn Hartwell Young Designers Fund received another $30,000 in donations by summer. The first student selected was Naomi Bell, 17, daughter of a single father who ran a repair shop outside town. She wanted to design flood-resistant homes for rural communities. In her essay she wrote, "People keep telling me to choose something practical. I think safe housing is practical." I printed that sentence and taped it above my desk because it understood purpose better than any headline ever had. Northline launched Hearthline units in 3 states the following year. After a storm damaged a low-income neighborhood in Oklahoma, our home sheltered families who had nowhere else to go. One woman sent a photograph of her 2 children doing homework at a small kitchen table inside a unit I designed. I printed it, And on the back I wrote, "This is the point. Not the money, not the article, not the banquet where my mother's version of me finally broke. This was the point. A warm room, a safe table, 2 children studying after the world had taken something from them." Mrs. Hartwell visited Denver that spring. I walked her through the Northline Design Lab, and she inspected the wall panels with the seriousness of a building official. After a long silence, she touched the insulation and said, "Good work." From her, that was a standing ovation. Before she left, she handed me a folder. Inside was my first drawing notebook, the one my mother had dismissed in the motel office when I was 15. Mrs. Hartwell had kept it all those years. She said she thought I might want proof that the girl in the back office had known what she was doing. I held that notebook and felt something inside me loosen. Not grief exactly, not joy exactly, but the strange relief of having a younger version of myself finally believed. Here is what I know now. The people who raise you do not own what you build. A parent can feed you and still fail you. A family can give you shelter and still hide the door. And when they stand beneath warm lights and claim your work as their sacrifice, you do not have to scream, collapse, or burn the room down. Sometimes all you have to do is stand where they placed you, take the microphone they handed you, and tell the truth clearly enough that everyone hears the lock turn. My mother thought she was inviting me home to thank her. Instead, I came home to return what never belonged to her. My name is Maribel Voss. I built my life in the space they tried to keep small, and if you are listening with a dream someone has called foolish, remember this: the road they hide from you still exists. Find it. Walk it. And when they try to take credit for the distance you traveled alone, keep your voice steady, then tell the truth. Now I want to pause here and speak to you directly, because this story is not only about Maribel Lenora and one banquet where the truth finally came out. This story is about every person who has ever built something quietly while the people closest to them ignored it, minimized it, or waited until it became valuable enough to claim. Have you ever had someone dismiss your dream when it was small, then suddenly stand beside you when it became visible? Have you ever noticed how some people do not support the process, but appear very quickly for the result? What makes Maribel's story so painful is not only that her mother hid those letters. That betrayal is already cruel. But the deeper wound is the way Lenora tried to rewrite the meaning of Maribel's entire life. She did not simply block her daughter's opportunity. She later tried to present herself as the reason that opportunity existed. That is not just control. That is theft of narrative. It is someone trying to take ownership of a struggle they did not carry, a journey they did not protect, and a success they did not help build. And notice Maribel's response. She does not scream. She does not beg the room to believe her. She does not turn the banquet into chaos. She stands exactly where her mother placed her for manipulation and uses that same microphone for truth. That is what makes quiet revenge so powerful. It does not need noise to be strong. Sometimes the most devastating answer is a calm voice, clear evidence, and the courage to say, "That is not the version I lived." There is a moment in this story that matters deeply. When Maribel realizes her struggle was not only difficult because life was hard, it was difficult because someone had made it harder on purpose. That realization changes the whole past. When you believe you suffered because no easier road existed, you can still make peace with the hardship. But when you discover that a road did exist, that a door was open, and that someone who claimed to love you quietly closed it, the pain becomes more precise. It gets a name. That is why the hidden letters are so powerful. They are not just paper. They represent stolen time, stolen ease, stolen dignity, and stolen choice. They represent debt Maribel did not need to carry, nights she did not need to work, exhaustion she did not need to normalize, and years where she believed survival was simply the price of ambition. Family betrayal hurts because it does not only damage your circumstances, it can damage your understanding of your own story. Lenora's control is also important because it is not loud in the obvious way. She knows how to sound loving in public. She knows how to make selfishness look like sacrifice. She knows how to turn guilt into a leash and duty into a cage. People outside the family see the polished version, the proud mother, the community woman, the person who says family matters. They do not see the locked office, the hidden letters, the silent father, and the daughter who learned to make herself small so everyone else could stay comfortable. And this is something worth saying clearly. Not everyone who says family first truly means love first. Sometimes they mean obedience first. Sometimes they mean reputation first. Sometimes they mean, your life should remain useful to me, and if you choose yourself, I will call it betrayal. In Maribel's case, Lenora did not want a daughter with a dream. She wanted a daughter who would stay close, stay available, and stay grateful. When Maribel became successful outside that system, Lenora tried to pull that success back into her own story. Calvin's role is quieter, but still painful. He is not the main villain in the same way Lenora is, but his silence also harms Maribel. He gives her $300, and yes, that matters. But he also knows later about the hidden letters and says nothing. He chooses the easier peace over the harder truth. Many people recognize this kind of person. Someone who privately agrees with you but publicly abandons you. Someone who knows something is wrong but does not want conflict. Calvin's apology matters, but Maribel is right not to rush into forgiveness. Forgiveness is not something you perform so the room can feel clean. Brennan represents another form of entitlement. He assumes Maribel's success is a resource he can use. He talks about investments she never promised and treats her reputation like collateral. This happens often when one person becomes successful after years of being underestimated. The people who dismiss the dream suddenly treat the result as family property. They were not there for the discipline, the loneliness, the rejection, or the debt. But when money appears, they call it family. This is why Maribel's choice at the banquet is so strong. She refuses to invest in private dysfunction, but she still invests in the community. She does not fund the motel. She does not rescue Brennan's careless project. Instead, she creates the Evelyn Hartwell Young Designers Fund for students who might be trapped by the same kind of fear and limitation. That is not shallow revenge. That is transformation. She turns a wound into a doorway for someone else. Mrs. Hartwell matters because she represents real support. She believed in Maribel before there was a contract, before there was money, before there was public praise. Real support protects the beginning, not only applauds the result. When Maribel names the fund after her, she is correcting the moral record. She is saying, "This is the person who showed up when my dream was still fragile." Sometimes your real family is the person who helps you become free, not the person who only reminds you what you owe. The most powerful lesson here is that truth does not always need to be dramatic to be effective. Maribel does not destroy herself trying to destroy her mother. She does not become cruel because she was treated cruelly. She simply refuses to let the lie stand. That is a mature kind of revenge. It says, "I will not carry your version anymore." Sometimes healing requires distance, but sometimes it also requires correcting the record when someone is using your silence as permission. The banquet also shows how fragile public image can be when it is built on edited truth. Lenora spent years controlling how people saw her. She was the mother, the business owner, the community woman, the person who held everything together. But reputation built on a lie needs constant maintenance. Truth only needs one opening, one letter, one witness, one steady voice. And think about this line: "You also hid the road out." That sentence explains the whole emotional wound. Providing a roof is not enough if you are also locking the doors. Feeding a child is not enough if you are starving their future. Keeping someone close is not the same as loving them. Real love prepares people to leave when leaving is necessary. Control makes them feel guilty for wanting a life. So I want to ask you honestly, are we supporting the people we love? Or are we only supporting the version of them that remains convenient for us? Because many dreams are not destroyed by open cruelty. They are buried under practical language. People say, be realistic. They say, think about the family. They say, now is not the time. Sometimes that advice comes from wisdom, but sometimes it comes from fear. And fear, when dressed as responsibility, can become a very convincing form of sabotage. Maribel's real victory is not that her mother is embarrassed. Her real victory is that she no longer needs Lenora's version of the story. She no longer argues for permission. She no longer waits to be understood by people who benefited from not understanding her. She leaves Briar Glen without stopping because the place that once looked enormous has finally become small. That is what healing often feels like. The thing that controlled you does not always disappear. Sometimes it simply loses its power over your imagination. If you have ever built something alone, this story speaks to you. If people ignored your process but wanted to stand beside your result, this story speaks to you. If someone tried to stop you and later tried to claim you, you are allowed to correct the record. You are allowed to say, no, that is not what happened. You are allowed to honor the people who truly helped you and set boundaries with the people who only appeared when your hard work became useful. And if you are a parent, mentor, friend, or family member listening to this, there is also a responsibility here. Do not become Lenora in someone else's life. Do not dismiss a young person's dream just because it scares you. Do not call fear wisdom. If someone you love wants a life bigger than the one you understand, your job is not to shrink them back into comfort. Your job is to ask better questions, offer honest guidance, and let them walk through doors that were never available to you. So tell me in the comments, have you ever had someone dismiss your dream when it was small, then try to claim your success when it became visible? Have you ever had to correct a version of your life that someone else kept telling for their own comfort? And if you have a Mrs. Hartwell in your life, someone who believed in you before the world had evidence, maybe this is the moment to remember them with gratitude. In the end, Maribel did not just expose her mother. She reclaimed her own narrative. She stood in a room designed to make her grateful for manipulation and turned it into a room where truth had witnesses. She did not burn down the stage. She simply stopped performing in someone else's play. And sometimes that is the strongest revenge of all.